Welcome everyone to Tomorrow's Problem podcast. I'm Jake.
And I'm Nolan.
And on this episode, it's going to be the first part of a 3-part series where we talk about the brief history of mass violence in the United States. And this is going to be starting in 1764.
Yeah.
And this first part is going to take us to 1966. And
Yeah. And we kind of gathered a few different events to be able to use them as almost examples, unique circumstances for just to kind of to show the early history of how shootings occurred.
Each one of these events represent a certain facet that we see in school shootings today.
Psychotic issues, revenge, ideology, political unrest.
That's right. And the interesting thing is in this first part, this 1700s to the late 1960s, we kind of see that the motivations are different from the motivations of perpetrators we see today. Whereas today it's a lot more like, punching back at society and these existential crises. Back then it seemed like a lot more of personal grievances, revenge, very personal events of violence.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, so we'll jump into the first one.
That's right.
Which was actually before the inception of our country.
That's right.
It was in 1764 in Pennsylvania. So before, it was a colony, right? Colony of Pennsylvania. And there was a schoolhouse ran by a man named Enoch Brown. And he'd had about 10 to 12 students. They don't really know exact numbers, but he was kind of in Indian territory. So indigenous tribes were running around, and there was a lot of strife and conflict.
A lot of friction.
Yep. A lot of conflict between the colonists and the indigenous people. And we're not here to kind of get into the history of that, but that's just to kind of set set the
stage.
Yeah, set the stage. So Enoch Brown, his school was attacked by Lenape indigenous tribesmen. 4 of them came to the school, killed him and his students, and there was only one survivor. So 9-10 kids were killed and then scalped. Enoch Brown was also killed and scalped by these indigenous people. And so that first motivation really, it's not the typical shooting that we see today, but that is the first time that a school was targeted.
Yeah,
and
the vulnerability was, being the main point of reason for them.
Exactly right, soft target.
That's right, yeah.
And so that kind of kicks us off.
That's right.
For attacks in the U.S.
And, we won't be going over every single attack that happened in this time frame. But, yeah, a lot of between then and our next event, there are a lot of just, like, one-off shootings or, killings where it's, maybe a student who got disciplined by his school, goes back the next day and kills the principal or a teacher or something like that. There's a few events like that.
Exactly. One-off murder.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of murders and attacks in that.
That's right.
That way.
But yeah, let's jump to 1891.
Yeah, so after that, the next, and I mean this is different too because James Foster is considered the first mass shooter of a school. So James Foster in Newburgh, New York, he's an older gentleman, 70 years old, frustrated with whatever was going on. And he actually went to a school and fired a shotgun into the crowd of students who were out on the playground.
Yeah.
And attacked them. And there was a lot of surprise at this because this was the first time that someone, first off, targeted schools or targeted students with a weapon, with a firearm.
Yeah.
Other than the other ones that we've talked about.
Yeah. But it's interesting because, before or at this time, they saw guns as tools. They didn't see guns as a means of killing students. That was unheard of. So that event must have been just such an existential crisis for those people, thinking, what is going on?
There's a lot of surprise, the end of innocence, right? There's a lot of kind of news lines or headlines that kind of echoed that surprise.
Yeah. And so, let's jump ahead to 1927, Bath, Michigan, what's called the Michigan Schools Disaster, or Bath School Disaster.
Bath School Disaster.
That's right. Happened in Bath Township, 1927, by Andrew Kehoe. This guy's pretty interesting. He was kind of a curmudgeon. He was known in his community as being someone who had problems and was always causing contention. And he was appointed. He was actually an elected official for a little bit, for like 3 years. He wasn't very much liked at all by his
Oscar the Grouch.
Yeah.
By his neighbors. By
That's
his
right.
community members. Yeah.
In 1924, he was elected as a trustee on the school board. And so, to give you a little context, at this time, the Bath Township was building a school system, right? And so, everyone's property taxes had to go up a little bit to account for that, and everyone's fine with that, but not our friend Andrew Kehoe. The increase in his property tax caused him to go into financial strife. He made him very angry. Interesting thing about him, too, when he was a kid, his father married his mom died. His father married a much younger Frances Wilder, and she was actually killed as she was trying to light an oil stove in their house, and exploded, setting her on fire. And, at the time, this was seen as like a freak accident. But looking back at Andrew...
He tried to put her out, too,
He tried to put her out with a bucket of water.
Yeah.
Which, if anyone knows what an oil fire, water will only exacerbate the problem.
Oh, yeah.
So, looking back, his neighbors, the community are like, was this Andrew's first murder? Because he really did not like his new stepmom, Frances Wilder.
And he liked explosions.
He liked explosions, because at this time there was a lot of, rocks and stuff on people's properties. So pyritol and dynamite were used all the time to blow up these things. And Andrew started stockpiling those things. And since he was a member of the school board, he took a part in helping build the schoolhouse. And so he was building the basement. He was the only one down there, and he started planting pyritol and dynamite down there to be rigged. He set up with like an alarm clock to be rigged for a certain time. He rigged the school, he rigged his property, his farm, and he rigged his truck.
Jeez.
And
scorched earth.
So in 1926, at 8:45 a.m., he rigged the bomb to blow. And the bomb killed 38 children in just the initial explosion.
Jeez.
Of course, the whole community rushes to the scene, including the superintendent, Emery Hyuk, and which is exactly what Andrew Kehoe wanted.
Yeah.
So when the superintendent shows up, Andrew's there in his truck. He gestures over to the superintendent to come to his truck. He comes over to Andrew. Andrew detonates the truck, killing him, the superintendent, and then a couple bystanders, one of them being a resident who came to see what's going on, another one being a child that survived the explosion, came outside and was blown up by Andrew.
Out of the frying pan into
right.
the fire.
That's right. And also he blew up his farm at the same time. But the interesting about this, besides the totality, the amount of people he killed, was the response from the community. This was kind of the first time where we've seen this post-event mania, the super spectacle kind of driven thing. And over the next few days, over 100,000 cars descended upon Bath Township. People were coming in to see the site and see the commotion. And a lot of the community was upset by this. They thought it was exploitative. Disrespectful, yeah. And so this is something we see nowadays too. This is a part
carries over.
That's a very big part where the news speculation becomes what defines these events.
Yeah, and we don't want to talk about the perpetrator. We don't want to glorify the event. We obviously don't share images and all that stuff. But yeah, it carries over.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's jump ahead a little bit to 1966.
Were we going to cover the Walk of Death?
That's right.
Okay. So, in between Bath, after Bath, there was actually, a couple world wars. A lot of soldiers coming back, showing symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and one of those soldiers was Howard Unruh. He lived in New Jersey, Camden, New Jersey.
That's right. And this is about 1949.
Yeah, 1949. And Unruh was kind of an interesting bloke. He lived with his family, continued to he was a little reclusive, had very interesting relationships for that time.
Yeah.
With his neighbors, with other community members.
He had friction with his community, basically, especially his next door neighbors.
Oh, yeah. And when he came back from the war, His family noticed that his behavior had changed. He was very reclusive, isolated himself, wasn't able to really form normal social relationships.
Had a hard time holding down his job at the sheet mill or something like that,
Yep.
factory.
Yep, and he planned this attack. It was a premeditated attack. He took his Luger, it was a Luger 9mm, and went around throughout his neighborhood. That's why they call it the Walk of Death, because he just
Walked through his neighborhood and shot anyone he saw.
Yep, shot business owners, neighbors, anyone he could kind of get a hand on.
And guys, his youngest victim was 2 years old.
Yeah.
Who was just a 2-year-old boy who heard the commotion outside, looked out his window, and Andrew spotted him.
Happened to be looking through the window.
That's right.
Yeah, and he also targeted a business owner's family.
That's correct.
And the survivor, the only surviving member of that family was a 12-year-old boy. And he is actually the grandfather of one of the survivors of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas
That's
shootings.
right, the Parkland shooting.
Yeah, the Parkland shooting. And they both hid in a closet to survive and escape their attacker. Intergenerational trauma now. We've got
Of course, yeah, of course that's a coincidence, but when you have the numbers, so many events like this happening, yeah, you're going to start getting relationships between between events.
Yeah. He killed around 13 people. Killed 13 people, ages, right, like Jacob said, 2 to 68. And the interesting thing after this is he was declared insane. So afterwards, he was no remorse, no guilt, started exhibiting signs of psychopathy, but also psychosis. He didn't really have a connection to people around him and was having a lot of trouble kind of verbalizing what he had been feeling.
That's correct.
One interesting thing is during the final shootout with him and the police, he was in his apartment and a journalist got a hold of his number, called the apartment, and was able to talk to him. And the journalist asked him, "Why are you doing this? Why are you killing all these people?" And he just said, "I'm a little busy right now. I can't really answer that question." And just kind of showed no remorse.
Yeah. And as we say, psychopathy, psychosis and stuff, when we have Dr. Peter Langman on, we're really going to be able to dive into the definitions and the differences between what is, these clinical terms versus what society perceives psychosis to be and psychopathy.
Yeah, we like to say, "Oh, that person's crazy. That guy's a psycho.
Yeah.
What a nut job." But, Howard Unruh was one of the first instances where we actually saw someone who had psychotic symptoms.
Yeah.
And this detached antisocial behavior.
Yeah. Cool, yeah. Howard Unruh. Let's skip ahead, 1966.
Yeah. Charles Whitman.
Charles Whitman. Now, this guy is interesting because he was not the perpetrator that we know today. He was an all-American, flat top haircut, strong jaw, Marine, sharpshooter, married, had a good job.
Community.
That's right. Had a good, he was studying to be an architect. Had good prospects.
Yeah. Oh yeah, admired, respected.
Yeah.
Even his psychologist, so up until his shooting, the psychiatrist that was working with him admired him, wrote great case notes about him, said that that's where we get the term all-American man is from his psychologist who noticed how striking and charismatic he was.
And even back in those days where, marital abuse was pretty common, Whitman, he hit his wife twice, but his friends recall him telling them that he felt immense guilt about him beating his wife twice. So he was capable of empathy, he was capable of it.
Yeah, that's also interesting that his friends, it's interesting that his friends noticed that because they're like, why are you worried about that, Charles? That's fine.
Yeah, so he did have a moral compass.
Yeah, so all the way up until the shooting, he had been requesting an autopsy. He'd been struggling with a lot of homicidal and violent thoughts.
He's been working with a psychiatrist.
He was disclosing that. He was being really honest about those thoughts, but they were able to kind of talk him down. And prior to the shooting, he wanted to have an autopsy done on his brain after.
He asked for it.
Yeah, he asked for it.
He even said in his in one of his journal entries, he says, "I do not understand what it is that compels me to type this letter. Perhaps it is to leave some vague reason for the actions I have recently performed." He was trying to make sense of it.
And I like the next phrase, I do not really understand myself these days.
God.
Just lost.
Yeah.
Lost in his thoughts, whatever that kind of hurricane or storm is happening. So Charles stockpiles, collects. He's gathering weapons, ammunition, different supplies,
Some spam.
some spam, to kind of create a crow's nest up in this.
The University of Texas Tower.
Yeah.
And anyone that has seen this tower, it is in the middle of a big courtyard. You have 360-degree view of everything.
Yep. And he proceeds to start firing around 11:30. Oh no, actually he gets there at 11:30. Goes up the tower. He kills 2 employees, right?
Right.
2 employees.
He was
university
disguised as a delivery guy too, and no one questioned him because he just looked like a normal guy.
Yep. Yeah, that charm, that charisma, that confidence. Wherever that comes from. So he gets up to the 28th floor of the clock tower and begins to fire at people from up there. And he was up there for 96 minutes.
Wow.
And one of the reasons there was a huge delay in response wasn't because police they were unable to find him. They didn't know where he was shooting. Exactly. People were dropping different places, so they were almost responding in this large courtyard and area, not knowing where he was.
Oh man, wasn't a pregnant woman a victim? Right? She and her unborn child were both killed. Yeah, and we see that same confusion today in this last shooting at Highland Park here in Chicago. The people that were interviewed said they had no idea that there was a shot. They were shooting. They thought it could be fireworks. And that's a human's natural response. No one's brain is going to tell them at first, like, you're being shot at, your life is in danger in this moment. Your brain wants you to make sense of what's going on around you. So you're automatically going to think that this is something that can be explained normally. Reasonably.
There's got to be a logical reason that there's a loud noise happening. And every time you hear police report, or reading through reports of school shootings, that's always the first thing they think. Oh, what's that loud noise? Did a blackboard fall?
With Mitchell and Golden, the students and teachers out in the school, they thought it could be firecrackers, that someone's playing a joke, or it was like construction in the background. You never want to think it's a shooting.
Exactly. So after he'd been firing for 96 minutes, the police finally located him. They were able to intervene, stormed the tower, and ran up these stairs, and able to engage with him. Engage and then neutralize him. Yeah,
and if you guys should really read just like the details about the police response, because it is one of the most badass police responses. Those guys went into the, what's it called, the crucible.
Yeah. Into the lion's den.
The crucible. They went to the lion's den and just a couple of them too, right?
Yeah. And they knew what they were getting into, but they were able to respond effectively and with a lot of courage and bravery.
Brave soul.
Which we need that in this day and age.
But quickly, a lot of people say about Charles Whitman, that his motivation had been psychotic, because he requested an autopsy be done, opened him up, and they found a pecan-sized necrotic tumor in his brain. And they couldn't say that they couldn't tie the tumor to his actions conclusively.
Yeah, not yet either. This is before neuroscience and a lot of behavioral sciences are. There's psychology drifting around, but they haven't been studying the brain like that. But
the theory that was the cause is pretty strong, and honestly, I believe it too.
Yeah.
We see, in serial killers, we have, John Wayne Gacy, Albert Shawcross, Richard Ramirez, all suffered brain injuries in their childhood. And, that could be something that develops into this aggressive antisocial behavior.
Phineas Gage, we have a lot of psychological observational research where people have even lobotomies, they have damage to the frontal lobe, which is where a lot of our logic and reasoning occurs.
Yeah.
And to not say that it doesn't have an influence is, you're right, Jacob, there's got to be something there.
There's got to be something there. But we can't say it conclusively.
Yeah.
But, interesting stuff.
All right, so just to recap those
events.
Yeah. Just to recap those 5 events, we've got different motivations, different influences, different reasons.
Yeah.
The last one, Unruh and Whitman definitely kind of set the tone for the subsequent shootings that are going to occur, where we see a lot of psychological reasons for people kind of lashing out at vulnerable populations.
That's right. And yeah, next episode, or I guess the same episode, but next part, we will go into the 80s and 90s, and we will end that episode with Columbine. So definitely listen to that one.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for listening,
Thank you.
and stay safe.
That's right. We'll see you next time.